In the early 1860s, vast regions of southern China had fallen silent. Entire farming districts stood abandoned. Market towns that once held thousands were reduced to smoldering ruins.
Across the Yangtze River basin, armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands maneuvered through landscapes already devastated by famine, displacement, and disease. By 1862, the conflict known as the Taiping War had become one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. What began as a religious rebellion had grown into a struggle that would ultimately claim the lives of an estimated 20 million people and leave lasting scars on the Qing Empire. The origins of the conflict stretched back more than a decade. During the early 19th century, China's Qing Dynasty faced mounting pressures. Population growth had strained agricultural land and rural livelihoods. Government corruption and administrative inefficiency weakened local governance. Meanwhile, the empire had been shaken by military defeat during the First Opium War in the 1840s, exposing the limits of Qing authority and increasing public frustration. In the countryside of southern China, particularly in Guangxi province, tensions between ethnic groups, secret societies, and impoverished communities created a volatile social environment. Amid these conditions emerged Hong Xiuquan, a schoolteacher from Guangdong who had repeatedly failed the imperial civil service examinations. After encountering Christian missionary writings, Hong developed a religious worldview that blended elements of Christianity with his own interpretations.
He came to believe he had a divine mission to transform China.
Over time, he gathered followers who believed that the Qing dynasty had lost its moral legitimacy and that a new heavenly kingdom should replace it. By the early 1850s, Hong and his followers had organized into a movement known as the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. What began as a regional uprising soon transformed into a disciplined military campaign. Taiping forces moved rapidly across southern China, capturing cities and attracting new recruits among rural populations suffering under economic hardship and local instability. In 1853, the rebels seized Nanjing, a major historic capital on the Yangtze River. The city was renamed Tianjin, meaning heavenly capital, and became the center of the Taiping state. The establishment of this rival regime presented an unprecedented challenge to Qing rule. For centuries, dynastic authority in China had depended on maintaining order across vast territories. Now a massive insurgent state controlled key river routes, agricultural lands, and major population centers. The Taiping leadership introduced sweeping social and political reforms, including land redistribution plans, new administrative systems, and strict religious regulations within their territories. While these policies attracted some supporters, they also created tensions among local elites and communities who were uncertain about the movement's radical vision. During the late 1850s, the conflict spread outward from the Taiping stronghold in the lower Yangtze Valley. Armies from both sides expanded in size, drawing in militia groups, provincial forces, and irregular fighters. Warfare in this period involved large-scale sieges, extended campaigns across river networks, and repeated struggles for control of strategic cities. As fighting intensified, the civilian population bore much of the burden. Agricultural production declined sharply in contested regions. Trade routes were disrupted, and widespread displacement forced millions of people to abandon their homes. By the time the war reached its peak intensity in the early 1860s, the Qing dynasty had begun to reorganize its military response. Traditional imperial banner forces had struggled to contain the rebellion, prompting regional officials to raise new armies based on local recruitment and leadership. Among the most prominent of these commanders was Zhang Guofan, a scholar official from Hunan province. He organized the Xiang Army, a provincial force that gradually became one of the most effective anti-Taiping military formations. The year 1862 marked a turning point in the broader conflict. After years of expansion, the Taiping state faced growing internal and external pressures. Leadership struggles had weakened the movement's central authority. Several senior Taiping leaders had died or been removed during earlier power struggles, leaving a fragmented command structure. At the same time, Qing forces had gained experience and coordination through years of sustained warfare. In the lower Yangtze region, Qing armies launched a series of campaigns designed to isolate Taiping-controlled cities and cut off supply routes. Control of river transport was critical. The Yangtze served as the main artery linking central China's agricultural heartlands with coastal trade centers.
Whoever held the river corridor could sustain large armies and maintain logistical support. Qing commanders focused on gradually tightening control over these strategic waterways. Another factor shaping the conflict in 1862 was the growing involvement of foreign military expertise. Although foreign governments generally maintained formal neutrality, certain Western officers and mercenaries became involved in organizing local forces aligned with Qing authorities. One such unit, later known as the Ever-Victorious Army, operated around the Shanghai region and helped defend economically important areas from Taiping advances. These developments reflected the increasingly international dimensions of the late Qing era, when global trade and diplomacy intersected with domestic upheaval. Meanwhile, the Taiping leadership struggled to maintain cohesion within its territories. Governing a large population under wartime conditions proved difficult. Strict religious rules and centralized authority sometimes alienated local communities. In some areas, economic disruption led to food shortages and administrative breakdowns. As Qing forces recaptured territory, civilians often found themselves caught between retreating rebel armies and advancing imperial troops. The human consequences of the war were immense. Entire provinces experienced population decline as violence, famine, and disease spread through the countryside. Historical records and demographic studies suggest that some regions lost large portions of their inhabitants during the years of conflict. Villages were abandoned, irrigation systems fell into disrepair, and farmland returned to wilderness in areas where fighting had been particularly intense. Despite these hardships, the war continued with remarkable persistence. Both sides mobilized enormous numbers of soldiers and resources. Campaigns lasted months or years, often revolving around protracted sieges of fortified cities. Control could shift repeatedly as armies advanced and withdrew across the same devastated landscapes. The cumulative toll on infrastructure, agriculture, and public administration reshaped the social fabric of central and southern China. During 1862 and the years immediately following, Qing forces gradually regained the initiative. Regional armies coordinated more effectively, and supply networks strengthened their ability to sustain long campaigns. Zhang Guofan's forces, along with those of other provincial commanders, tightened the pressure around key Taiping strongholds along the Yangtze Basin. Nanjing, the Taiping capital, remained the central objective. Although it would not fall until 1864, the events of 1862 marked the beginning of the final phase of the war. Surrounding cities were captured, transport routes were severed, and the Taiping state faced increasing isolation. As imperial armies advanced, the balance of power shifted decisively toward the Qing government. Yet victory came at a staggering cost. By the time the conflict ended, the devastation across much of eastern and central China was difficult to measure fully. Contemporary observers described vast stretches of countryside where settlements had disappeared and agricultural systems had collapsed. Reconstruction required years of labor and administrative reform. The long-term consequences of the Taiping War extended beyond immediate destruction. The rise of regional armies during the conflict permanently altered the political structure of the Qing Dynasty. Provincial leaders who had raised and commanded their own forces gained influence that the central government could not easily reverse. This shift contributed to new patterns of power within the empire and shaped later efforts at modernization. The war also revealed deep social tensions within 19th-century China. Rapid population growth, economic inequality, and regional instability had created conditions in which large-scale rebellion could take root. The Taiping movement itself reflected both religious innovation and social protest, drawing support from people who felt excluded from traditional structures of authority. In the decades that followed, Qing officials attempted to rebuild the damaged regions and strengthen state institutions. Efforts known as the self-strengthening movement sought to modernize aspects of China's military and industrial capacity. Although these reforms achieved some progress, the underlying challenges facing the dynasty continued to grow as foreign influence expanded and internal pressures persisted. Looking back, the Taiping War stands as one of the most destructive conflicts of the 19th century. Long before the global wars of the 20th century, this civil war reshaped an empire and transformed the lives of millions of people. The year 1862 captures a moment when the struggle had reached its most intense and decisive stage, when armies clashed across the Yangtze Basin and the fate of a vast region hung in the balance.
The scars left by that war remained visible for generations.
Fields had to be replanted, towns rebuilt, and communities restored after years of upheaval.
Yet the memory of the conflict endured as a reminder of how quickly social pressures, political weakness, and ideological movements could combine to ignite a catastrophe on an enormous scale. In the history of modern China, the Taiping War remains a defining chapter, a civil war whose consequences shaped the final decades of the Qing Dynasty and echoed far beyond the battlefields where it was fought.